Yeah, market news now. Chinese stocks led declines in Asia, with the yuan falling to a 4-month low as traders grappled with weak corporate guidance and signs that Beijing is relaxing its grip on the currency. And commodities, oil held a 2-day drop, with traders assessing the outlook for global interest rates and geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. Locally, South Africa's third largest mobile operator, Telkom, announced it has inked terms for the sale of its mast and tower business SwiftNet for 6.75 billion rand. The sale of SwiftNet, which has about 3,900 commercially viable towers in South Africa, was long expected. Telkom had first mooted separately listing SwiftNet in 2021, but then ultimately shelved this plan, citing market conditions. To give us more perspective on the markets, we are joined by Mohammed Wagley, who is the portfolio manager at Sasfin Wealth. Mohammed, thank you so much for your time. What do you make of market sentiment now that we had Fed Chair Jerome Powell's news conference on Wednesday?
Thank you for having me, Anastasia. So I'd say that, broadly speaking, it's been quite good. Obviously, on the sort of local side, we had a bit of a reprieve yesterday on account of the national public holiday. But the American market actually responded quite well to this news. They were up about 0.3% yesterday. And that was on the back of hitting sort of all-time highs the day before. So really continuing on in that sort of strong fashion. It was a bit choppier sort of from a European perspective. We didn't really see too much movement in that regard. And then obviously today you just mentioned the Asian market sort of coming off somewhat. But we're actually seeing a bit of a lag knock-on effect here in the local market. The JSE is up about 1.2%, and I imagine it's on the back of sort of the positive sentiment after Mr. Powell's conference on Wednesday.
When you look back at the week that was, were there any company-specific news or perhaps a particular theme that drove markets?
Quite a few things, actually. Perhaps maybe less so company specific and more so thematic. I'll start with Monday, because there was a big thing on Monday. We had the GTC AI conference, which is really just sort of the global tech conference where you get all of the big tech players come out and tell you sort of what is sort of their next latest and greatest innovation. And really this year it was NVIDIA that was the big headliner, and they announced their Blackwell microchip at the conference, which is sort of the latest iteration of the AI-enabled microchips. I think very simply speaking, those chips help in training and then deploying AI software, kind of like ChatGPT. So they also gave guidance of sort of robust demand for their products, and that reinforced sort of this already prevailing narratives, which served to boost them somewhat, but really, broadly speaking, boosted, I think, the balance of the tech tickers on the back of this news. And I think then subsequent to that, really, the story was looking ahead to the outcome of the Fed meeting, which was held on Wednesday. I did briefly mention that a little bit earlier, but looking ahead to that, we actually saw quite a bit of risk-off sentiment prevailing here. So on Monday and Tuesday, the local market did suffer a little bit, but subsequent to that, we did actually see a decent recovery. Just on company-specific news, we did actually get some reports. I think on Wednesday, we got a few reports from some of the big hitters here on the local side. Discovery and Investec came out with numbers, and we had a few others earlier in the week. But again, I mentioned we had the public holiday this week. So from a local perspective, it was a little bit more quiet. Just one thing that I should note that I think is worth mentioning, and I actually saw this earlier this morning, was a post from Neuralink where they showed their first patient. And I think you might recall that there was an implant put in this patient's brain a few weeks ago, perhaps even a month ago. And basically they were reporting back on that. And really what this patient was able to do was move the mouse on the computer using his brain. He was able to play chess, just really using his brain, not really touching anything on the keyboard. And he was also able to turn off music. Now, there are a few kinks, and the gentleman did also sort of point to that. It's not 100% yet, but I think the potential for practical application here is massive. Definitely something worth keeping an eye out for going forward.
Absolutely. But let's bring things locally for a bit. We've got Advertech earnings on Monday. What are one or two things that you're going to be paying attention to when those results come out?
This is quite an interesting one. I think I'll be looking at it sort of within the context of contrasting it with those Curo numbers that came out not too long ago. Just for context, this company is actually the largest private education provider in Africa, as the name might suggest. They also provide custom tech learning platforms to schools, which is something I quite like. But really what I'll be keeping an eye out for is the numbers in relation to their school division. With reference to Curo, we're seeing a bit of a flight away from sort of those high-end schools, just in relation to people, having to budget a little bit more is the reality of things. Advtech, on the other hand, has been pretty much growing across the board in all three of their segments. So what I'll be keeping an eye out for is sort of the growth in that school division. I'll also be keeping an eye out for how well the company has sort of navigated really what is a challenging environment, almost without exception. When we look at local results, we're hearing about load shedding, we're hearing about trouble at the ports. I think they're a little bit more insulated in that respect. And if I look at the performance of this company over the past year, they've actually done about 72%, which within the context of South Africa, make no mistake, is absolutely phenomenal. So eagerly awaiting those results on Monday.
As we wrap up, what's your sense of the SA local, or rather the local equity market?
I think, to keep a very sort of depressing long story short, my view is actually quite bleak here, and therefore, quite a few reasons, one of which I mentioned earlier. If you look across the results, across all the sort of SA Inc. companies, they're always pointing towards load shedding, towards trouble at the ports. And the truth is, even the most diehard optimist isn't going to sort of necessarily factor in that these problems are going to dissipate within the next year or so. If anything, it's more likely that they'll become more pronounced. So, within that context, within the context that, the JSE has had more delistings than IPOs over the past 5 years, it's getting tougher and tougher to navigate sort of the JSE, especially if you're looking for excess return, and when you contrast that to the S&P 500 and, little sort of other pockets of sunshine across the world, it is becoming more and more challenging, and there's quite a few metrics that really reinforce this point. But, if I get started on that, I really won't stop, Nastasia.
Mohammed, thank you so much for your time. And we'll leave that conversation for another day as we unpack some of those metrics that you do mention. That is Mohammed Wagley, who is the portfolio manager at Sasfin Wealth, giving us his perspective on the markets.